All right. Both parties, Republicans and Democrats, have a strategic ambiguity when it comes to our southern border. We need immigrants to come into this country and work for our corporations. Many of those corporations want the immigrants to be here without any documents because they're easier to scare. An immigrant without documents doesn't ask for time and a half for overtime. They work when they're sick and they keep their mouths shut. They do what they're told out of fear that the boss will turn them into immigration. In fact, the business model for most slaughterhouses, cleaning services, and construction companies is hiring undocumented immigrants because they don't make trouble. Cheap labor. But this country also needs someone to demonize for jobs being taken away or a social safety net that's broke. It's not the rich corporations shipping jobs overseas or preferring undocumented employees because they work cheaper. No. It's not the rich corporations refusing to pay their fair share of taxes, which leaves our schools and public health care underfunded. No, it's all those undocumented people from south of the border flooding into our country and using up all the social services and taking our jobs. Like I said, the rich and the powerful, they don't want to solve the immigration problem because for the rich and the powerful, there is no immigration problem. It's working exactly the way they want it to. They get cheap labor and somebody to demonize, somebody to blame for the lousy public schools or whatever. We're now coming up on the 11th year anniversary of DACA, when President Obama tried to address the inhumanity, the cruelty of keeping children who were brought to this country by their parents without any documentation, and then they're forced to live in the shadows as adults. Americans, they're Americans. It's the only country they know, but they're Americans without citizenship. They're not born here, but America is the only country they have ever known. They live in fear that at any time the monsters from ICE, and they are monsters, the monsters from ICE can grab them and ship them back to a country they haven't lived in since they were 2. President Obama tried to get Republicans to pass the Dreamers Act, which would have solved this problem. Since 2001, representatives from both sides of the aisle have been trying to pass the DREAM Act, which would give to minors not born in America, minors who arrived before the age of 16, an opportunity to apply for permanent residency if they met certain requirements, like graduating from high school. And if they're male, they register with the Selective Service. But the DREAM Act could never pass. So on June 15th, 2012, Obama signed DACA, which stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It was an executive order that instituted much of the DREAM Act that couldn't get passed in Congress. It was an executive order, but more than 800,000 young Americans registered as dreamers. But, like I said, it's an executive order, so DACA to this day continues to be challenged in our courts. Trump rescinded DACA, meaning there would be no new applications. And it also left the 800,000 dreamers who signed up under Obama somewhat secure, but also in a psychological state of limbo, not quite sure where they stand. Joe Biden reinstated DACA, and once again, DACA was challenged in the courts. So millions of Americans brought here as minors are left without a country, a sense of belonging nowhere. America is their home, but they can't get permanent residency status. They can't become citizens. Studies show DACA recipients are less likely to commit crimes than regular citizens. They're more likely to work and pay into Social Security. And most importantly, they themselves, and this is the most important fact, they themselves live healthier lives, no longer plagued by the mental health issues that arise from living in the shadows, living with the fear that the monsters from ICE are going to round them up and send them back to a country they wouldn't recognize. Now, do you understand America's immigration policy? Because I don't. The reason I don't and you don't understand America's immigration policy is because we're not supposed to. They've played a trick on us. They tie it up in the courts because Congress refuses to address the immigration problem, which is not a problem for the rich and powerful. It's working exactly the way they want it to. So they leave it to the courts because if it's in the courts, it's too Byzantine for anybody to understand. The destiny of these dreamers, their destiny bounces from circuit court to circuit court. And while Biden's rhetoric is softer on immigration than Trump's, he's still deporting families. So there's no official policy, but no official policy doesn't mean there isn't a policy. The policy is no official policy. The policy is confusion. The policy is, let the courts confuse everybody. There is a policy when it comes to undocumented Americans. The policy is exploit them at work and exploit them politically. There very much is a policy here in America when it comes to immigration. It is use undocumented Americans as a source of cheap labor and an even cheaper excuse for everything that's wrong with America. Everything that's wrong with America that could be solved if the rich and powerful would just pay their fair share of taxes, pay workers a livable wage. It's a very coherent immigration policy, just not for us. Just like the war in Iraq, which we all think is a failure, our immigration policy is turning out just fine for the people who stand to gain financially from it. Meanwhile, dreamers live in a state of terror because America is controlled by sadists and racists who will say and do anything to anyone to accumulate more wealth and for the pleasure of watching people suffer. Professor Cornel West announced he was running for president on the People's Party ticket last week. This week, he announced he would also be running as a Green Party candidate. Now, the People's Party was founded after the 2020 election by a disgruntled Bernie staffer, and so far it only has ballot access in Florida, but not the presidential ticket. The ballot, no access, even in Florida, doesn't have access to the presidential ticket. Journalist Christopher Hedges reportedly arranged a meeting on June 10th between Cornel West and members of the California Green Party, where a deal was struck for West to also run as a Green Party candidate. Ann Garrison, writing over at the Black Agenda report, says that the Green Party has significant access to presidential ballots around the country. Meanwhile, some Democrats are accusing Cornel West of trying to siphon off Biden voters and make it easier for Trump to win in the general election. Well, that's one way of looking at it. Or Biden could use his pen and sign a series of executive orders that animate the left so they don't seek solace in the candidacy of Cornel West. Biden could sign some executive orders right now, like forgiving all student loans. And yes, it will be challenged in the courts because everything gets challenged in the courts. But if Biden uses his pen between now and Election Day, maybe he can win so big in November, he'll be able to spend the next 4 years redrawing the courts. So challenges to progressive executive orders do hold up in court. We have divided government, and no major legislation is going to get passed between now and January of 2025. So use your pen, Joe. It shouldn't be that hard to sign a couple of executive orders that make Cornel West irrelevant. A federal grand jury on Thursday indicted the 21-year-old Massachusetts Air National Guardsman who leaked classified material on a Discord channel for gamers. Jack Teixeira could face as much as 60 years in prison. Some of the documents he leaked have ended up being used by the news media. Based on his leaks, the Washington Post was able to report last week that the Biden administration knew 3 months in advance that Ukraine was planning to blow up the Nord Stream gas pipelines in the Baltic Sea, even though after the explosions, the Biden administration insisted that Putin was probably behind it. Pulitzer Prize investigative journalist Seymour Hersh reported earlier this year that the pipelines were, in fact, blown up by the Biden administration. So who's done more damage? This 21-year-old kid leaking those documents, or the Biden administration leaking the Nord Stream gas pipeline? The Nord Stream explosions were the second largest release of methane in world history, right after Chris Christie getting up from his couch last Thanksgiving for seconds. We never would have known the truth about the Nord Stream pipeline explosion had it not been for this 21-year-old kid leaking the intelligence documents. Most of what's classified, most of these documents that are classified are protecting people from the crimes, from our finding out about the crimes they committed. The Associated Press is reporting that the Justice Department has begun looking into whether or not the PGA's proposed merger with Saudi Arabia's LIV Golf violates antitrust law. Oh, good. They have to look into this. Let's see. LIV Golf was suing the PGA, claiming it was a monopoly, and the PGA was suing LIV Golf, claiming it was a monopoly. And then they dropped their antitrust lawsuits and decided, you know what? Let's merge. So how could they now be a monopoly? Everyone knows when two incredibly large corporations accusing the other of being a monopoly merge and form one new company, there's no way that the new company could also be a monopoly. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, is a socialist, and that means nobody here in America gets to hear what he has to say. Nobody knows about him here in America. He's the Secretary General of the United Nations. Yesterday, Antonio Guterres called the oil companies planet wreckers who are lying to the world by claiming they can expand the use of fossil fuels through unproven technology known as carbon capture. Listeners to my podcast know that Professor Marianne Cummings, physicist, has been telling us for years that carbon capture is a fallacy. It's impossible. Well, the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, yesterday said carbon capture is bullshit. He said, and I quote, "Let's face facts. The problem is not simply fossil fuel emissions, it's fossil fuels, period. The former head of Portugal's Socialist Party then went on to say, quote, "We are hurtling towards disaster, eyes wide open, with far too many willing to bet it all on wishful thinking, unproven technologies, and silver bullet solutions." The Secretary General of the United Nations then warned that for every dollar that oil companies spend on fossil fuels, they only spend 4 cents developing carbon capture technology. He concluded, quote, "Trading the future for 30 pieces of silver is immoral." That's the Secretary General of the United Nations, who works right here in New York City. But here in America, nobody listens to him. Instead, we listen to commercials from Shell. They sponsor all our mainstream news gathering operations. And Shell keeps telling us how much they're working on alternative energy. And yet, like the UN Secretary General says, they're planet wreckers, and planet wreckers lie. They lie. They are destroying they're killing us. Shell is killing us. Quartz, the magazine Quartz, reports that Shell had record profits in 2022. They made $43 billion in 2022. That's twice what it made the year before. Why? Well, because the price of gas went up. There's your quick lesson in inflation. Why do prices go up? Greed, right? $43 billion in 2022. The cost of gasoline was unaffordable. It doubled, as did Shell's profits. We're finding that most of the inflation in America is caused not by supply chain issues, but just by greed, by convincing Americans that inflation is an issue, and then they secretly, they raise their prices and they hope that nobody notices their bottom line. They don't have to raise prices. They raise prices because they can. But that's not what I'm talking about now. I'm talking about how they destroy the planet, not our financial situation. Quartz reports that Shell spent 7 times as much on stock buybacks and increasing dividends for shareholders last year than it did on developing renewable energy. That was 2022. And this year, it's even worse, what they're going to be spending on fossil fuels, because there's new leadership at Shell this year. And this new leader feels the stock is undervalued, right? And so he's announced a policy shift. It's a new policy shift over at Shell. Reuters reports that to pump up profits and the stock valuation, Shell unveiled before a meeting of investors this week a new policy. They're abandoning the old policy of searching for renewable sources of energy, and they're going all in on drilling. The new head of Shell says the future for his company is no longer renewables, it's liquid natural gas. Reuters reports that Shell has completely scrapped its investments in offshore wind, hydrogen, and biofuels. Now, the previous CEO of Shell, Bernard Looney, that's his name, got a lot of praise last year and the year before when he vowed to cut oil production by 40% by the end of the decade. And he vowed to turn Shell into a carbon neutral corporation. But all those plans have been scrapped. But don't listen to the Secretary General of the United Nations. Listen to all those Shell commercials sponsoring your favorite news channels. Watch all those ads that Shell will be putting on MSNBC and CNN and Fox News, trying to convince us that Shell is leading the fight against climate change. they've completely abandoned their carbon neutral policy. Meanwhile, those Canadian wildfires continue unabated. The Guardian reports that America's Midwest can expect a fresh blanket of Canadian smoke as the winds drift southward. Smoky skies and air quality alerts have been reported in Wisconsin and Minnesota. The National Weather Service says New York City can expect air quality alerts throughout the weekend as new smoke arrives. It's very depressing. I went for a walk today and not good. Not good. Scientists in Europe report that the temperature of our planet momentarily spiked by 1.5 degrees Celsius this month, reaching the hottest this planet has ever been since the Industrial Revolution. They warned that, coupled with the El Nino effect in the Pacific Ocean, 2023 will probably end up becoming the hottest year on record. The world has been warned that should the planet's temperature rise beyond 1.5 Celsius permanently, as opposed to just spiking the way it did earlier this month, that would be the tipping point where heat waves, droughts, and flooding would become so severe and so frequent, billions of people would find the planet no longer habitable. It's happening quicker than they predicted. But hey, transgender influencers are endorsing Bud Light, so we have more important things to worry about than the planet. A group of young people in Montana took their state to court this week, saying that the state of Montana's dependency on fossil fuels is a direct violation of a 1972 addition to Montana's Constitution, which reads, quote, "The state and each person shall maintain and improve a clean and healthful environment in Montana for present and future generations," unquote. The case is 12 years old. Several Montana attorney generals have tried to get it thrown out of court, but the case is finally being heard. Senator John Kennedy, no relation to John Kennedy, or reality for that matter, Senator John Kennedy represents the deplorables of Louisiana. And on Wednesday, as the planet burns, he stood in the well of the Senate to challenge Joe Biden's Energy Department regulations on climate change. But don't worry, this isn't about our gas stoves.
Now, the Department of Energy itself admits that 20% of families who own a dishwasher never use it. Why is that?
Because we no longer eat together as a family. We don't sit down and use dishes. We order takeout and rely on paper plates.
It's because they don't want to taste last night's jambalaya in their morning Cheerios.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Why do I get the feeling Senator John Kennedy's morning Cheerios taste like scotch and soda? No milk for me, honey. I'll just pour the scotch and soda in there as usual. A federal judge on Thursday set January 15th, 2024 as the start date for E. Jean Carroll's second defamation suit against Donald Trump. If you remember, E. Jean Carroll last month won the first suit after a jury ruled that Donald Trump sexually assaulted her and then defamed her reputation, and the jury awarded her $5 million. Donald Trump is appealing that decision, but Carroll has a second case. That case was already in motion before Donald Trump's CNN town hall last month, where he called E. Jean Carroll a whack job. Her lawyers complained to the judge in the second trial, and the judge ruled this week that her lawyers were allowed to amend the second defamation case, and they're now asking for $10 million because of those statements. On Thursday, The same judge set the new trial date for E. Jean Carroll's second defamation case against Donald Trump, and that will be January 15th, 2024. You know, I got to hand it to Donald Trump. The guy just turned 77. He stays so busy. He's got the Manhattan DA suing him, the trial with the Manhattan DA. He's got the state attorney general suing him. He's got these indictments in Miami, and then there are going to be some new indictments coming from the special counsel on the insurrection. And he's got 2 cases with E. Jean Carroll, 77, right? God bless Donald Trump. You got to stay active. This is the secret to longevity. Here is Senator Lindsey Graham, who is terrified that Donald Trump is going to tell the world what we already know about Lindsey Graham. So when Lindsey Graham isn't drinking too much, he's making the rounds of television shows defending the indefensible. Here is confirmed bachelor Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, who's never met the right women. Here he is giving a message to Donald Trump.
We got your back. President Trump, we have your back.
Bad choice of words, Lindsey. I don't think you should be the one telling Donald Trump you got his back. Not sure Trump wants to give his back over to such an openly confirmed bachelor like Lindsey Graham. Okay, so why do you have the president's back, Lindsey?
From my point of view, conservatism is in good hands with President Donald Trump.
Okay, conservatism is in good hands with Donald Trump. You mean the $7 trillion of debt he racked up as president? You know, the national debt is $33 trillion. $7 trillion of that is Donald Trump's. Is that the conservatism you're talking about? Or trashing the Justice Department and sending goons in to destroy the Capitol? That kind of conservatism is in good hands? Is it respect for family values, like 30 credible rape allegations? See, I wasn't quite sure what conservative values Lindsey Graham was talking about until I saw college dropout Charlie Kirk. He runs Turning Points USA. He also has a radio show, and he's a big supporter of Donald Trump and a big conservative. And I didn't. What kind of conservative values does Donald Trump keep secure? Here is Charlie Kirk interviewing Helen Andrews, the senior editor of the American Conservative magazine. And this will give you an idea of what conservative values Donald Trump is preserving.
Tell us about your piece and the argument that white defendants can't get a fair hearing in the modern justice system.
Thanks, Riley. Just this week, we've seen a grand jury indict Daniel Penny, the young Marine who held Jordan Neely.
That's Helen Andrews, senior editor of the American Conservative. And there it is. That's Trump's conservative values: racism, white nationalism. That's what conservative values have morphed into thanks to the Republican Party. Racism. Everything else is irrelevant. And hatred for the LGBTQ community. It's racism. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that Donald Trump Jr. has some emails he may not want us to see. Donald Trump has an old college buddy. I love this name. Gentry Beach. That's his friend. Gentry Beach. It sounds like every restricted oceanfront property in Rhode Island, doesn't it? Gentry Beach. No Jews or blacks, please. Anyway, Gentry Beach, if anybody's writing a screenplay and one of their characters is an asshole, use the name Gentry Beach. Gentry Beach is suing his old employer, some capital management firm. The trial's been going on for more than a decade. And the Wall Street Journal reported yesterday there are some emails that Don Jr. sent to Gentry Beach that have been entered into evidence And Don Jr. doesn't want the judge to release these emails because Don Jr. makes disparaging comments about blacks, Jews, and Mexicans in those emails. As they say, like father, like Nazi. Tuesday afternoon, after his arraignment in the Miami courtroom, Donald Trump stopped off in Little Havana for a meal at a Cuban restaurant named Versailles. A Cuban restaurant named Versailles. And he was videotaped shouting, "Food for everyone." Well, it turns out food for everyone just meant food for me. New Times reports that nobody had their meal paid for by the former president. Well, what do you expect? You're eating at a Cuban restaurant named Versailles. When I'm in Miami, I go to a French restaurant called Bay of Pigs. Now that's good eating. Forbes reports that while Donald Trump kept boxes of classified documents in bathrooms, showers, or on ballroom stages in Mar-a-Lago, there were 380 foreign workers who all had the run of the place and access to all those rooms where the classified documents were. While Donald Trump issued a travel ban for foreigners and tried to build a wall to keep Mexicans out, there was no ban, no wall keeping foreigners from working at Mar-a-Lago for as little as $11 an hour, and all the classified documents you can stuff into your trousers. Senator Tommy Tuberville represents the state of Alabama because he's a racist. No, seriously, he's a racist. Last month, Senator Tommy Tuberville was asked if white nationalists should be allowed to serve in our military, and Tommy Tuberville said, "Biden calls them white nationalists. I call them Americans." When he was speaking at a campaign rally in Nevada last year, Donald Trump was there. The very racist senator from Alabama, Tommy Tuberville, told the crowd that Democrats, quote, "are not soft on crime." He went on to say, "No, Democrats are pro-crime. They want crime. They want crime because they want to take what you got. They want to control what you have. They want reparations because they think the people that do the crime are owed that." Like I said, a racist. This is what he said at a campaign rally last year. Donald Trump was in attendance. Democrats are pro-crime. They want crime. They want crime because they want to take over and take what you got. They want to control what you have. They want reparations because they think the people that do the crime are owed that. He is saying that black people are criminals, racist, or Republican. Same thing. Here is the racist Tommy Tuberville, who is tough on crime, defending Trump's mishandling of classified material. And always remember that bigots are idiots.
And yeah, they were secure. I mean, he said they had to go in there and they had to bring a locksmith to open some of the locks.
Over the bathroom, though.
Well, I don't know about that now. I don't know about that.
You effing idiot. Yeah, it was secure. It was secure. What about the bathroom? I don't know about that. It's the only thing we know about the classified documents is that they were stored in the bathroom at Mar-a-Lago. Well, idiot. Former Attorney General Bill Barr was on Fox News again, and I got to say, he's pretty good attacking his old client, Donald Trump. Here he is addressing the Trump defenders who say the president shouldn't be indicted over paperwork. They just dismiss it as a dispute over paperwork. Here is former Attorney General, Republican attack dog for Donald Trump, who's now attacking Donald Trump. Here's Bill Barr explaining why it's not a dispute over paperwork.
The position is being taken that this is really just a document dispute over custody of documents, and the president has good arguments as to why he should have kept them. I think the arguments are farcical and will be shown as such.
Okay, so explain why the president is being prosecuted.
The president is being prosecuted here because it's an obstruction case, and he's in trouble for what he did after he got the subpoena.
I see. Bill Barr, former attorney general under Donald Trump. You're saying that Donald Trump is being prosecuted for obstruction. But Robert Mueller, in the Mueller report, laid out an entire pathway to prosecute Donald Trump for obstruction of justice in Russiagate. Remember, you were the attorney general, and, Mueller in the report talks about Trump firing James Comey, head of the FBI. But as attorney general, you didn't think obstruction was bad. You didn't think that Trump should be indicted. Why is obstruction of justice an issue now? Well, he's not going to answer that. Come on, Bill.
If he thought he had arguments that these were his documents, there are many things he could have done to raise those arguments. He could have moved to quash the subpoena. He could have given the documents to the government and then sued to bring him back and made his legal arguments as to why they're really his. But he didn't do that.
So what did he do instead?
He engaged in an outrageous act of obstruction and deception that obstructed that subpoena. And that is wrong. That's a law. That's a violation of law. That's a serious problem for him. What he did was, according to the indictment, he took a lot of the boxes away, hid them from his lawyer, told his lawyer to go and search what remained, and then caused that lawyer to file a statement of the court saying that there had been a complete search. And if anyone did that, that would be obstruction. So that is why I think the Justice Department pulled the trigger, and that's the central part of this case. So talking about whether he had the right to have the documents or not, while it's ridiculous, it's a sideshow. He has you cannot defend what he did with that subpoena.
Okay, I don't understand, because you were Attorney General, and Robert Mueller, in his report, the second part of the report, laid out a pathway on prosecuting Donald Trump for obstruction of justice. He wrote about Trump firing the FBI director, James Comey, because Comey wouldn't stop investigating Russiagate. Trump told Lester Holt on NBC News right after he fired James Comey that he fired James Comey to put an end to the investigation into Russiagate. That's in the Mueller report. It was an open and shut case of obstruction of justice. The Mueller report spelled it all out, but yet you, as Attorney General, wouldn't prosecute. Mueller stopped talking to you because you wouldn't prosecute for obstruction of justice. You didn't even admit that the Mueller report laid out a pathway for obstruction of justice. Why all of a sudden are you so concerned about obstruction of justice? Why is this different?
That was a reason. That is a sound charge. That is right. He did not have the right to keep those documents, and he jerked the government around for a year. Put yourself in the government's position. You don't know what he has. He can have, and you don't know what's at risk. They needed to see that stuff. What are they to do?
What are they to do? What you did. Nothing. Don't do anything. All of a sudden, obstruction of justice is an issue. So why is this Justice Department prosecuting Trump, but when you were head of the Justice Department, you wouldn't?
I think that was a legitimate charge, but I don't think they would have charged it had he given the documents back. It was the obstruction of the subpoena that I think led the department to pull the trigger.
All right. So you're mad at Trump. Is it because he keeps calling you a pig now?
Well, he said I was a gutless lowlife, and clearly I have a gut. So that'll shed light on his veracity there.
Chris Christie also has a gut, and he's running for president. Now, I don't like Chris Christie, but he's going to make this first debate in August definitely worth watching. Here is a sample of Chris Christie. This is what the debates are going to look like. Here is Chris Christie eating Donald Trump's lunch on immigration.
But remember what he promised in 2016. He was going to build a wall across the entire border in his first 4 years, and Mexico was going to pay for it. Well, we got a wall that's about a quarter of the way done, and Mexico hasn't given us 1 peso yet. So, Donald Trump in 2016 was a guy who had no record, so he couldn't be examined in a very specific way. He now said he was going to do that with immigration. And by the way, had Congress for the first 2 years fully controlled by the Republicans, not one change in the immigration laws. So, of course, Joe Biden could come in and make things
So on a debate stage, he's going to say Biden stopped it. And you can go down to the border today and see piles of steel that are just laying there in the Arizona desert.
Yeah, Bill, those piles of steel have been sitting there since Donald Trump was president. He didn't get it done. He couldn't convince the Republican Congress to fund the wall. He couldn't finish it. And he didn't change one immigration law.
Okay, so I can't stand Chris Christie. And this is all, for show. But just in terms of the theater of the 2024 presidential election, Chris Christie is the guy to watch because he used to be a prosecutor. He was a federal prosecutor before he was governor of New Jersey. As a federal prosecutor, he locked up Jared Kushner's daddy. And the reason Chris Christie is so mad at Trump is because when Christie dropped out in 2016, he threw his weight behind Donald Trump, worked very hard to get him elected, and he wasn't welcomed into the Oval Office. He didn't really get any cabinet positions that he craved because Jared Kushner held a grudge against Chris Christie for putting his daddy in prison. That's why Chris Christie is going after Donald Trump, because he didn't get a taste of the Trump presidency. It's the same reason Jim Jordan, Freedom Caucus, is keeping his mouth shut about Kevin McCarthy, because Kevin McCarthy bought his silence by making him chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. Trump didn't give anything to Chris Christie to satisfy his thirst for power. So watch Chris Christie. He's going to be really interesting making the case against Donald Trump to Republican voters. Not so much Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis is just a bully and a coward. He's afraid of Donald Trump. He said if he's elected president, he would probably pardon the January 6th insurrectionists as well as Donald Trump. On Thursday, he, continued to pick on the most vulnerable. This Thursday, he announced plans to ban advanced placement classes in, I was going to show the article, but we're frozen. Am I frozen here? Yeah. Okay, I'm frozen. Well, all right, I can't. How deep are we in here? Am I even on? I don't know if I'm still on. Well, I think we're done. Let me check. Everything's frozen. Well, I'll wrap it up. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. This whole thing is frozen. Let me see. Yep, I'm frozen. Damn. Sorry about this. Hang on. Sorry. So sorry. What is... What is that sound? What is the sound? What is that sound? Everything's screwed up. All right. I don't know what happened, but I'm going to end this. I don't know if anybody's watching this. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. Is anybody here? Let me just see here. Oh, hang on. So you can stop this, and it's not picking that up. Can you? Hang on. Is that so? I'm looking at the. So you're here. All right. Hang on. But can you hear me? Jan B, Astral Shoals, Jerome, can you hear me? Julie St. John, you're here. So what? But you can't get my microphone. Sorry about this. Hang on. Can you hear me? Oh, my phone. Okay. I'm going to stop. Sorry about this. I'll see everybody tomorrow. I have to figure out what happened. Bye-bye.